I'm Tara.
And I'm Jim, and this is Feature Bang,
The podcast where two amateur writers do mainstream reviews of adult films.
Due to the subject matter, this podcast is for adults only.
Content warning. This episode contains some discussion of self-harm and suicide.
So Tara, with people going back to school, it got me thinking about my own school experience and remembering some outright blatant lies some of my teachers told me.
Oh no.
I think everyone has some of these, so I wanted to run a few by you and then ask if you can think about any in your own experience. And I just want to say, obviously, most teachers are not this daft, but I think we've all had a couple crazy ones in our time, so I wanted to just kind of revisit that.
Yeah, I love your stories from academia, so lay it on me.
Well, this is hardly ivory tower academia stuff, but I want to go.
No, you've got your pinky out right now. I can't see you, but I can hear your little ivory tower pinky flipped straight out.
There we go. I'm in tea sipping position. I want to take this young to old. So for me, one of these would be in middle school. My middle school health teacher said something, and it kind of reminded me of. Do you remember in Mean Girls how there's the health segment about abstinence-only education and sex ed, where the line is that the health teacher goes, well, if you have sex, you'll get chlamydia and you're going to die. Stuff like that. A spoof on the way that schools teach abstinence. And if you remember, I don't know about you, did you ever have DARE, the DARE program?
I was literally about to say, yeah, it's like the DARE of sex. They bring in some grizzled, sex-hardened person to tell you the horrors of sex having.
Right. So it kind of reminds me of that, but this would be more like DARE in and of itself. This lie that this teacher told was not as per DARE, but it was certainly in that vein of education where they just try to scare kids off drugs in this case. This particular middle school health teacher used to teach us that and quiz us about this particular lie. She said, if you combine any amount of caffeine and alcohol, your heart stops and you die. It's called the speed bump effect. And I just remember thinking, especially as I got older and thinking wait, what about rum and Coke? Or what about an Irish coffee? Just it being complete bullshit.
By that teacher's metric, I am immortal.
Yeah.
I am demonstrably immortal. Because whoo boy, do I like to mash the gas and the brakes at the same time, let me tell you.
You're hitting that speed bump. Well, there can be only one, so this is how the immortals identify each other. They can withstand the deadly effects of caffeine and alcohol.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Perhaps the most ridiculous one was when I was in high school. I had an English teacher that dead ass said to the class, we were reading Macbeth, and she said, now notice every time Lady Macbeth says a plural word, it ends in the letter S. That's Shakespeare communicating to us that Lady Macbeth is a literal snake.
Does that teacher... I have some things to tell her about plurals. Putting an S on them does not mean you are literally or metaphorically a snake. That is ridiculous.
This was one of the most ridiculous things that I had a classmate that yelled out, so what does that make Macbeth, a snake fucker?
Sorry, I think I'm clipping because I'm laughing so hard. Oh my god, what? Who told that teacher that? What? How did that assumption get in that teacher's head? Were they just... I guess you do see that a lot in art interpretation and interpretation of literary and theatrical works, which is oh, this thing means this because the author thought of it exactly this way, and there's a 1-to-1 ratio of thing to symbolism. Mm-hmm. And it's that's not how the creative process works. That's also not how plurals work.
Yeah, I mean, this was her own original theory that she was very proud of. She found that secret within the text. She read the code, read between the lines and the letters, and found Lady Macbeth's literal snakehood.
Well, I mean, it sounds like she didn't even read between the lines. She just looked at all the parts of the lines that were S and thought it looked like a snake.
She slithered around the lines.
There you go. Yeah, she got a little over serpentine in her interpretation. Well, that is, I applaud your classmate who gave an incisive critique of her interpretation, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had countless of these that I've forgotten because it was just so, like, for me, it was so normal. Like, granted, I had a few amazing teachers, and I think most teachers are good, but I had a few real oddballs that would say shit like this, and I think it became so normalized that I kind of just stopped registering it as weird. I kind of just took this attitude that my teachers are just bullshit artists, and so I don't have more of a running tally than this, except to say, like, this is the type of thing that would go on from time to time for me. I don't know about you. Do you have any such experiences?
Well, I have an experience in a similar vein to the one that you just shared. Maybe the joke is on a different person. I'll lay it out for you, and you can tell me. So I was in 6th grade, and my teacher we were studying language, and my teacher said that if all of the nouns were to disappear, that all objects would disappear.
Oh my God. I know that there is a strain of philosophy that does believe that. I don't know what it's called, but it's pretty ridiculous.
Well, 6th grade me, look, I only have this one anecdote because you, listeners of this podcast, might recognize that, Jim, you are the astute one of us. And so it does not surprise me that you have these memories of teachers bullshitting you. I, on the other hand, had a little bit of a different experience. So the teacher, my 6th grade teacher, she tells us all the things in the world would disappear if all the nouns disappeared, because, nouns are things. So I go home, and I draft up, like, my first ever, I don't even really know what debate is, I don't even know what, like, Lincoln Douglas is, but I go home and I do my very best to draft up a little, like, written debate with cross-examinations and just the works, and I was furious. I felt like I was being played as a rube, and so I go back in and I have my little printed out paper in hand with my points, and I am just ready to go to battle over the semantics of this. And that, Jim, that day that I walked into that class was the day I learned what a thought experiment is, and that sometimes you can imagine something that isn't the case, and you can hold it in your mind just as an idea that you're playing around with. And that is what the teacher was trying to do with the nouns, and she was very perplexed at me taking it so seriously, and I was ashamed. And I don't think the teacher was the bullshitter in that one. I certainly thought that she was, to me, subjectively, she was full of shit. But on second thought, I think she knew what she was doing.
Well, that story took a dark turn. You went in there and tried to debate a thought experiment and got ashamed by it.
See, here's the thing. I was not debating it on the grounds of it being a thought experiment. I was prepared to debate on a more, I suppose, ontological level, which is that if you got rid of the language component nouns, you would not get rid of things in the world. And the teacher was just trying to make a point about language, about how many things are nouns, and, like, how the parts of speech interact with the material world. I did not understand that, so...
I understand. You took the thought experiment very literally.
I did. It wasn't a thought experiment. I thought this was information I was being taught as fact, and that did not sit well with me. So, I was certainly prepared to call bullshit on my teachers back in the day, but, my success at that, debatable.
All right, well...
But it's fun to go down memory lane.
for some of us,
I hadn't relived that particular humiliation in a while. So it's, you gotta take them out, you gotta, like, dust them off. Sometimes you gotta get the rust off, make sure it's all shiny and just retroactively humiliating. But yeah, we put a lot of trust into the people who educate us, and lots of them are out there doing an amazing job. But, of course, there are those who leave a lot to be desired.
Well, there you have it.
Let's do a movie review. So, Jim, what are we discussing today?
We are discussing The Devil and Miss Jones. It is a 1973 film directed by Gerard Damiano, who is famous for such films as Deep Throat and The Story of Joanna. A little background, The Devil and Miss Jones is perhaps the most critically acclaimed adult film of the so-called golden age of porn. Noted critic Roger Ebert gave it a positive review, for instance. The film has a reputation for being especially artful at a time when adult film directors, including Damiano himself, were trying to show the genre's artistic potential, so we'll see if the film lives up to this reputation. The Devil and Miss Jones opens with a woman staring directly into camera. The woman is Justine Jones, played by Georgina Spelvin. Justine is talking dirty and begging someone to engage in sex with her, and right away we notice the quality of Spelvin's acting, at least I did. Her lines and facial expressions are skillfully performed, and they convey some real feeling, so I got a good sense, as soon as I started watching the film, that we were going to see some strong performances here.
It is a powerful way to almost an uncomfortable, I almost felt a little claustrophobic up close with Justine's face. So we're up close and personal with Justine, and you are absolutely right that she is so, and this is an important scene, so I think it's worth discussing a bit, even though it's very brief, because she's imploring, she's desperate. She reminds me of, and I don't know how timely this will be, but there was that famous clip of Winona Ryder at an awards show, and her face does every possible emotion the human face can do up there at that awards show, and it's mesmerizing to watch. And if you haven't seen it, you should go look it up because it's intense. But yeah, this was such a powerful opening, and it really is oh, this isn't just going to be a body on screen. This is a person, this is an actor. This is someone conveying real complex feelings.
Right. So the camera then reveals the man whom Justine is begging for sex, and surprise, it turns out to be director Gerard Damiano. Damiano is playing Albert Gork, a character who shares Damiano's dulcet-toned Bronx accent. Albert holds a finger to his mouth and shushes Justine's pleading. He insists that he's not crazy, and that if Justine will close her eyes, she'll see that, quote, he's here, and that he'll come out. But there's no indication of who Albert's talking about, nor where Justine and Albert actually are. All the camera shows is that they're sitting in what appears to be a small white room.
Yeah, it's pretty sparse and concrete, and there are no defining features about it, and also the camera is very, very focused on the two characters. But she's not working on him. She utters a frustrated "damn you," and then we get blue balls to credits, or I guess blue labes to credit. Can I make that kind of joke? We cut to credits.
We cut to title sequence, title credits.
Title credits, which are really cool looking. They were reminiscent of maybe there's a better word for this style, but they reminded me of the tarot a little bit. It's a very artistic title credit sequence.
There is sort of a tarot card looking devil icon that we see for the title sequence, and we hear some nice music. There's some classy piano music in the background, and actually the film soundtrack is pretty nice in general, I would say. But then very quickly we get an establishing shot of a dreary, rain-soaked city street. The color composition is mostly gray and yellow. There are taxicabs honking at traffic, and the overall mood is bleak. Watching this depressing cityscape from her apartment window is Justine. Having seen enough of the gloomy street, Justine sluggishly pulls down her window blinds. Her slow, listless movements here are suggestive of what's called psychomotor retardation, which is one possible symptom of depression. And something noteworthy right away about Justine's apartment is how lonely and isolated it seems there. She apparently has no roommates, and there are no pictures of anyone anywhere. Justine just seems pretty alienated from others.
A lot is conveyed visually that way, like you say, with her sluggishness, with the color palette, with the relative isolation. The city outside is busy and going about its day, and Justine is trapped in her depression, her ennui. So, she starts primping. It's not really clear for what at first, but she gets that moisturizer going. She is lotioning and potioning, and it's a pretty long funereal scene. It's a lot like preparing a body to be interred, which is not too far from what is going on here. She looks in her vanity, kind of undresses, like almost like she's seeing herself for the first time. Like she gives herself this once over. She goes to the bath. She draws a bath. She adds some nice essential oils and sinks down in. At this point, I was like, well, who moisturizes before they get in the bath? But then I was like, oh, because Justine is, she's out.
Well, yeah, what she does, she draws herself a bath, she eases into it, and with a kind of malaise on her face, she reaches for her razor, removes the blade, and slits her wrists the wrong way if she wants to maximize her chance of dying, but nevertheless, it is enough in her case. She does bleed herself to death there in the bathtub. Her head slumps at an unnatural angle, and the camera zooms out, putting distance between the viewer and Justine's corpse.
Her acting, like that moment of like fading and then losing consciousness and presumably dying, is done really, really well. Fun fact, this scene is several minutes long. I forget exactly how many. And Jim, you and I watched the same version of this, but if you go out onto the internet and you try to find a version of this video, it very often does not include this opening. And I think it's because on like adult tube sites, I would suspect a lot of viewers maybe don't have the patience for a prolonged self-harm suicide scene like this. And I don't blame them, but it is well acted and a lot is said with no dialogue whatsoever. And I thought that was really impressive and sad. This was not the way I was, well, of course this was how I was expecting this movie to start, but as my guileless viewer self, I was not prepared for the seriousness and the gravitas of this moment.
Big props to Georgina Spelvin and Gerard Damiano for what they've created here artistically so far. So, cutting to the next scene, we see Justine again. She appears to be just fine. She's dressed up, she's wearing white gloves, a black dress, and a gray shawl, and she's walking into a large, bright room with a beautiful, many-windowed wall looking out onto a forested landscape. And the picture is saturated with
so
bright yellowness, yeah. And also in the room is a desk with a sharply dressed man in black sitting at it. On the desk, there are some very old-fashioned materials. There's a feather quill pen and ink pot. There is an antique cigarette tray, and an old-style oil lamp. So, notably, this guy at the desk is working with some very dated equipment.
I think it's classy. I was very relieved to see this room. I was like, well, this fella is gonna sort Justine out. It's gonna be good. The movie's all gravy from here.
And we get the best possible confirmation that the film is not going to be shot as darkly as Story of Joanna.
No, those windows are letting it all in. Like, they are huge, and the scene we see outside is beautiful, and I love this set, and I was so like, hey, you made it to heaven, Justine. Maybe the sort of message is that everything is going to be okay, and Justine, she's very prim, like you described her outfit. She looks like she's in her Sunday best, and she's very doe-like and innocent, and she approaches this desk and seems to think that she is there. Well, she doesn't really understand why she's there at first.
It does seem so positive at the outset, but what ends up happening is the man smiles at her. He introduces himself as Mr. Abaca, played by John Clemens, and he asks Justine if she knows why she's there. And Justine isn't exactly sure, but she does have a sense that she's there for some sort of interview. She's assuming it may be for a job. Abaca tells her that technically there are two positions open, but in her case, there's really only one option. He holds off on describing what it is. In the meanwhile, though, Abaca offers Justine a cigarette in order to soften the news he's about to break to her. Things are not as positive as it initially may have seemed. But in offering her the cigarettes, he says, are very difficult for someone in his position to acquire at all. If the viewer couldn't already tell, we get a sense that this is definitely some sort of place in the afterlife, but we're not exactly sure where.
We don't know, like, whose team this guy is on or where this lives in the cosmology of afterlife. But to what you were saying, it's amusing because he describes the organization he works for as, like, this firm. And, like, one of the ways that he alludes to maybe the non-earthly nature of this place that they're in is that he tells her that the firm was started, like, long before cigarettes, so their charter doesn't technically account for cigarettes. And the implication is that because this, whatever this place is, was created before, like, the sin of consuming cigarettes, there's a loophole, so you can still smoke cigarettes just because they're too new to have been accounted for in the firm policy. It was really fun. Like, you get these little intimations of bureaucracy.
I wonder how they're smuggling the cigarettes into the afterlife. Like, is there like a cigarette mule that keeps dying and like opening up his gut and they all just tumble out into the afterlife? Like, I'm not sure how he's actually doing this.
I was about to say, yeah, they have mules and it's just souls that swallow a sandwich baggie full of cigarettes before they die and take them up to Mr. Bureaucrat here.
Well, he runs a very tight operation in that case. So Abaca says to Justine that there's no precedent for how he should deal with a unique case like hers. And Justine is, of course, very confused by this. He still hasn't let on exactly what's going on here.
No, he draws it out so much. I am, like, feeling Justine's frustration, and he keeps euphemistically referring to her accident.
Right. But then eventually, after being so diplomatic about things and after taking great pains to try and soften the blow as much as he can, he comes right out and says Justine is dead and he is a bureaucrat. His job is gently to transition Justine into the afterlife. And what's unique, he says, about Justine's case is that her death was so incongruous with the way she lived. Abaca says Justine's record, meaning her conduct throughout life, was exceptionally clean, exceptionally free from sin, so much so that she was already slated to go to heaven. But since she killed herself, what Abaca, as you mentioned, keeps euphemistically calling her accident, Justine must be condemned to hell. Suicide in this film is the one thing heaven cannot forgive, and Abaca outright says as much.
Justine is a little disappointed with this news. You know, you live a perfect life and then just, you do this one thing and it's hell forever. She's kind of lamenting that she didn't do anything in life to earn going to hell. Like, her take is that, like, well, damn, if I was gonna, like, end up in hell anyway, I may as well have lived a life of sin. And, Abaca's like, I have him listed as Absy in my notes, by the way. But he is like, well, no, surely you're not suggesting I send you back to commit robberies and murder. He also makes it clear that don't even ask me to send you back, because I'm never going to do that. Don't even try to convince me to send you back. That's not even on the table. I don't even know why I brought that up. And he does kind of, as a matter of curiosity, he asks her, like, what her sin would be, and she chooses lust. She would have lived a lusty life to earn her way into hell, had she the chance to do it over again.
Yeah, I like the logic here. I really like where this is going. So Justine makes it clear that going to hell is one thing, but it's especially bad to go to hell without even having gotten the enjoyment of living a life of sin. So provided that Abaca has no discretion as to whether she'll go to heaven or hell, ultimately, she's at least going to try and argue that if she's going to do the time, she might as well do the crime. And it's interesting that they settle on lust. I kind of like the argument that Justine makes here, because after Abaca says, you know, we can't just send you back, what if you rob or murder someone, she comes up with a victimless crime. She says, all right, well, what about lust? Because lust is a victimless crime in spiritual terms, and it is one of the 7 deadly sins. So if she's going to go to hell, she might as well make it worth it. And not only does she want to make it worth it, she wants to go all out. She wants to make up for lost time, because Justine was so straight-edged that she really never enjoyed herself in life. So she's not only going to go back and be lustful, she wants to go back and be, quote, consumed by lust.
Abaca's like, you know, you're like a virgin. You wouldn't know lust from anything. And she gives this monologue, and it is a very lusty monologue, where she articulates that she just wants to be engulfed and consumed, and every other word that you could use to describe the process of being just masticated and swallowed by sheer lust. And Abaca's a little moved by this. He's buying it.
I love Abaca's reaction, and props to both actors in this scene, because John Clemens, as Mr. Abaca, is also effective here. He goes from being so cordial and bureaucratic and matter-of-fact, all the way to being just outright gleeful at Justine's suggestion. And you could tell the thought of doing something unconventional for Abaca is so much fun for him. This guy has a really boring desk job. So he decides that he's going to justify temporarily sending Justine back to Earth to live out her lust-filled potential, and he's going to think of a way to do it. And he's so gleeful about this, and he says, okay, well, I don't have the power to give you your whole life back, but what I can do is basically delay processing you to go to hell for as long as I can get away with. And if you, Justine, if you want to use that time to return to Earth and realize your lust-filled potential, who's to stop you? So that is the plan that Abaca and Justine agree upon.
He gets real, as you say, gleeful. Like, he's the one who puts on the table, no, I can't send you back. And she hasn't... I have this in my notes because I was chuckling about it. He's the one who brings it up as an impossibility twice, I think. And that's what causes her to be like, well, actually, why couldn't I go back and engage in all of this lustful congress to earn my way to hell? And eventually he's like, well, okay, like, if you're twisting my arm about it, I guess I'll send you into the den of lust, and I'll be watching, though. Like, he makes it very clear that he is going to be observing her progress, because she's on a time crunch. This is not an indefinite time frame she has to do this stuff. So he's got to keep an eye on it. He can only hold off the afterlife bureaucracy for so long. But they agree, and she kisses his hand and then walks out a magical door.
And into that door, Justine enters a cozy-looking bedroom/study, presumably somewhere on Earth. I think the film is actually unclear about whether she's in some sort of limbo-like afterlife location at this point, or whether she's actually back to Earth. I'm inclined to think that she is back to Earth, because the deal was that she would get to kind of live her lust-filled potential in like a living state while Abaca processes her for being dead. So I think that's what's actually happening here.
I have a theory. This is a non-canon theory, but she got sent back to Earth. The catch was she could only visit the various rooms of the Zone erotic club from Throat, A Cautionary Tale. Because this feels... The rest of this movie, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying it's very compartmentalized in its various rooms and sets. There's not a lot of going between them, and it just reminded me a bit of the Zone sex club and kind of two characters going on a safari watching various forms of copulation. So that's, in my headcanon, Justine has ended up in some sort of 70s proto The Zone.
Yeah, somebody needs to digitally alter some of this footage to include Penny Flame gawking at what's going on. But, okay, so Justine she has gone through this magic door. She is flesh and blood once again. She's entering this cozy-looking bedroom or study-type place, and she meets a man there, played by Harry Reams. And Justine asks him for help because she's lost, but the man tells her he's happy to help all that he can, but she's not actually lost after all. He refuses to say in specific where the room that they're in is located, though, and he also refuses to give his name, but says Justine can call him the teacher. And personally, I assume this character is some kind of devil, because his role is to teach Justine lust, given that Justine has no prior experience with it. And to that end, the first thing he does is work some magic on Justine to lower her inhibitions. I
love the sound effects here. It is full on, like, spacey. Just imagine the most sci-fi, like 70s sci-fi sound, and that is what he does. He, like, puts his hand, he reaches a fairly creepy hand out toward her face and makes some sci-fi sounds, and then bam. She lusty.
Bring down your head.
They are too good to go unheard. It's wonderful. That was such a delightful aspect of this movie, among many delightful little details.
One thing that I found noteworthy here is that Justine stipulates to the teacher that she's unattractive, and the teacher agrees with her, stating that her body is built practically rather than in ways pleasing to the eye. And the only reason I even bring this up is that it struck me, I've never seen a film of this genre play down the physical appearance of its leading lady. I think the norm in this genre is quite the opposite, but Gerard Damiano clearly does not want to lean upon any stipulation of his leading lady's beauty. They're just gonna stipulate that she's not as attractive, and it struck me as being so weird. I never expected to see that.
It was an odd moment. I kind of accepted it maybe as part of the overall sort of Dom. This guy's very Dom-like, and I thought he was maybe negging her a bit. But I think practical is not the most damning word to describe a body with. As I age, I am increasingly grateful that my body remains practical, even though it is not going to remain any particular looking, I'm not going to retain any particular look for my entire life, but I could stay practical my entire life. Is it too early to talk about Georgina Spelvin herself? Because I think it's worth noting at this point that she was, I believe, 37 when she filmed this, or when she acted in this.
She was 37 when the film came out and 36 when the filming happened.
Either way, that is, in terms of especially modern adult films, that is an outlier age-wise, unless you're getting categorized as a MILF or something. It was fascinating to me to see a leading actor who was in their mid to late 30s, who also withstood this critique of their body as part of the script. The confidence of Georgina Spelvin in this role was very exciting to me, and it was wonderful to watch her. So, yeah, the teacher negs her, but describes her as practical. There's another element to that, though. When he's describing her as practical, his reasoning is that skinny ladies don't have as much cushion for the pushin', which he thinks is a good thing. She's a little more easily accessible, I suppose. Which I thought was skinny ladies and other shapes of ladies, we all kind of go the same depth, dude. It's not... Anyway, I thought that was funny.
Well, my body is hilariously impractical, so I do appreciate Georgina Spelvin's practicality and her performance in this scene and in this film generally. And I also kind of appreciate that Gerard Damiano didn't feel that he had to rely on quote-unquote porn star tropes in the casting. Props to everyone involved here.
Hell yeah.
What ends up happening after this is that the teacher initiates Justine into an extended exploration into various sex acts involving him and other people, apparently over the course of some days. Now, we at Future Bang don't do reviews of sex scenes as sex scenes. We just mention that they happen if and only if they're integral to the plot or character development. We don't analyze the actual porn itself. The reason that that's kind of an issue here is just how long it goes. There's a whole extended, almost 45 minutes, I would say, in the middle of the film that's just nothing but scene after scene after scene of Justine getting onto the hedonic treadmill and becoming more and more insatiable as she goes deeper and deeper into exploring increasingly wild expressions of her lust. And she loves it, but she also can't get enough. And she's also aware that this enjoyment will be fleeting since her time is almost up and she's slated to get sent to hell.
I prefer the hedonic elliptical myself. It's a little easier on the knees. I will say that without reviewing the acts themselves, you still get a lot of characterization for Justine. One thing about this movie that I'm only going to address once, I think now, and maybe at the end, is that the male actors, once the love scenes start, Justine kind of ignores the rest of the male actor and is very hyper-focused on his appendage, or whichever male actor's appendage. Like, she talks to the teacher's body more than she talks to the teacher, and she's very enthusiastic to meet this body, and she has a lot to say to it. And it was kind of funny I don't know, it's difficult to talk about without getting into the acts themselves, but it endeared me to Justine in a way that I was not expecting.
So, while Justine is living up to her lust-filled potential on Earth, she meets up again with Abaca, and they're walking together in a pleasant grassy field. Justine says that she's never been happier, and she asks him to petition heaven to let her live the full amount of time that she would have had in life had she not killed herself. But Abaca says that's impossible, and that his voice means nothing to his superiors, and as far as they're concerned, he's a nobody, just like Justine is. And I can see why Justine thought this would work, though, because of something that you mentioned earlier, Tara, in that Abaca, even the idea of sending Justine back, Abaca was like, well, clearly that's absolutely impossible. So already we know Abaca is willing to bend the rules, if not break them, especially if he finds it amusing. And so I can see why Justine thought that she could at least try to ask him to intervene on her behalf, but apparently he really is powerless in that regard, and she really is slated to go to hell as soon as her time runs out.
It's a little funny. She's like, please, I'll do anything, possibly implying maybe, I don't know, sexual favors. And Abaca's like, you would do anything anyway. She has already demonstrated that she will do any old debased thing. And Abaca's just like, he's like, you have nothing to bargain with. I'm sorry.
So eventually, Justine's time does run out. She ends up back at Abaca's desk. She's nervously smoking one of his rare cigarettes. He asks her if she's ready for hell, not that she has a choice, and Justine initially says yes, but then she quickly begins to plead with Abaca to stay alive longer. That is beyond his power, however. All he can do, he says, is to try and ease Justine's transition. And she confesses that she's frightened of hell, but Abaca confronts her, saying that the depiction of hell as a fiery furnace is just a myth, and that she'll actually be comfortable there.
I love how, in this scene, Justine is so visually different from how she was when we previously saw her in this office at the beginning of the film. At the beginning, if you recall, she was wearing white gloves, a light gray shawl, and a rather prim dress, and now she's very much the bad girl. She is smoking cigarettes in the high school bathroom, wearing all black, painting her nails black, pissing off her parents. Like, she has gone full bad girl. And in a weird way, she seems to think that this should somehow redeem her, like she has looped all the way around to so sinful that she should just be allowed to keep committing sins, which is funny. I love her attempts to, like, keep postponing the inevitable. It's very realistic and credible. I think a person would actually do what Justine is doing, put in the bizarre situation she's in.
Absolutely, yes. But nevertheless, Abaca insists that Justine touch his hand, and in so doing, she gets transported to hell.
And we get more cool sci-fi sounds.
Touch my hand.
From this point on, the film goes in a direction reminiscent of Jean-Paul Sartre's play No Exit. Abaca was right. Hell is not an inferno, but it is a place of other kinds of torments. Justine finds herself in the small white room we saw at the beginning of the film, and Gerard Damiano is there with her playing Albert Gork as he was in the film's opening sequence. Justine tells him she didn't expect hell to be this way, by which she means a tiny white room that she's sharing with some random dude. Albert asks, well, who could have expected this? And then he contrasts the banal kind of hell they're in with a more mythical one that he says might have included something like witches or goblins or thousands of hungry rats. And then Albert's speech starts to get simpler and almost juvenile in tone, kind of like when a child is telling a story. He mentions that he found an odd-shaped mote of dust in the room, which implies that Albert has probably been there a long time and has been so bored and lonely he's had nothing better to do than to examine the shape of individual specks of dust. And he goes on to say the mote of dust was pointed instead of round, which he took as strong evidence that a fly must have been in the room and must have tried to eat the dust. The film then shows us that Albert is insane.
I love sort of floating down the river of sanity and then realizing you're about to go over an abrupt waterfall as soon as this guy starts talking about the fly, because he's like, yeah, the pointy dust and the fly did it, and flies have digestive tracts, and no, you can't see him, he's too smart for that. Like, it's very like, it's like you said, it's very much a little kid telling a story in its aimlessness and its simplicity, and it's like the non sequitur feeling of what he's saying about this, and like he's being tormented by this maybe non-existent fly. That is his hell.
Yeah, and one of the things that doesn't really help Albert's case for his own sanity is he starts insisting repeatedly that he's not a crazy person, which is not something that a sane person usually has to say.
It's never a good look.
But Albert says the fly is surely there with them, though, and if Justine will just close her eyes and pretend to sleep, he'll come out. Now, Justine is completely uninterested, and says that all sounds like a waste of time, but still being consumed by lust and having grown accustomed to it, she has a serious need to get her satisfaction. So Justine tries to seduce Albert, which doesn't work because he's completely uninterested in sex and completely interested in his delusion about the fly. He's also offended that Justine doesn't share his interest about the importance of the fly, and offended that she seems to regard him as the crazy person that he does appear to be. So Justine keeps begging Albert for sex and talking as dirty as she possibly can, but Albert's just getting agitated and even whiny at the possibility that if he fails to pretend to be asleep, he might miss the fly, and that would be such a shame because the fly is so important.
I like how initially Justine was probably like, she arrives in hell, she realizes she's sharing a cell with a man, a penis haver. And you gotta figure that for the first few seconds before she realizes that this guy is in his own fly-based hell, she had to have been like, well, alright, at least I can fuck down here. Like,
yeah.
I think she was ready to take that as a consolation prize. Like, well, if I have to be in hell, at least it is with this person with whom I can copulate for eternity, and therein lies the real hell, because he's not. I wonder what his life was like, that this was his hell. That was what I was thinking about this whole scene, was this dude's personal hell is so specific, the way that Justine's personal hell is so specific. So you wonder what his sins were, what his fixations were that resulted in him having this obsession with the fly. And then you gotta figure that Justine is part of his hell too, because she's making all this ruckus. She's not going to sleep. She won't pretend to be asleep so the fly will show up. Like, I thought it was interesting what it implied about this character that we only really see very briefly at the beginning and end of the film.
Yeah, and this is why I say it's like Sartre's no exit scenario, because hell turns out to be other people. It's especially people who are incompatible with each other, who are tormented by each other's presence or each other's gaze, rather than by the stereotypical fiery inferno, much in the way that Sartre depicts in his play No Exit. So I think, I'm pretty sure Damiano must have been making this film partially as an homage to No Exit, which would have come out when Damiano was a teenager, and I'm sure he must have seen, perhaps in New York City, an English language performance of it. But in any case, we then get an exact repeat of the movie's opening scene. It just recapitulates itself, and Justine, at the end of that, comes to realize that she's going to spend eternity in misery, because, of course, like you mentioned, Albert will never sate these powerful new urges she has, and she will suffer the torment of eternal deprivation of her needs, made worse by the fact that there is a man right there that might have otherwise been able to help her with that if only he wasn't crazy. and also made worse by the fact that she's going to be irritating him for eternity as well, since she is going to spend eternity begging Albert for sex, thereby, in Albert's mind, scaring away the fly. So they're going to have a conflict that's going to last forever. And that's it. That is the film. The film cuts to credits right there, ending on the unique sort of hell that gets depicted in contrast to the popular conception of what hell must be like.
I like the way at that last moment the camera kind of just pulls back. Like we, the viewer, are receding from this pair, leaving them to their mutual misery. It's a very forlorn final shot, and I thought it was great. And I loved how macabre the end of this film was. I will say, I heroically did try to cobble together notes about the rest of the scenes, but it really is a succession of just erotic situations. Some of them are hilarious, though, I have to say.
Yeah, well, given that it's not our style here at Feature Bang, we probably shouldn't go too far into that. But let me just say, if we did, it would not be very fruitful.
Well, I don't know. I think we could weave in sort of a serpentine way around the different scenes and focus. There was a bed that looked like it was made of railings and doorknobs. I got very excited about that. There was a beautiful bowl of fruit. There was an adorable snake. Listener, it was wonderful. You should go watch this film.
So, you're recommending the film. Can I take it that you did like the film, Tara?
I really did like this film, Jim. As a story, it was a little bit simple, but really well considered, and it implied a lot with a few brushstrokes. Like, this was obviously meant to be titillating and to appeal to an adult audience, but it's also very clear that the writing was given a lot of thought, and that is sort of par for the time, the golden age of adult film. But this is a standout example of it, and it does a lot of things that other movies of its time didn't do as well. When we reviewed The Story of Joanna, for example, that was a much darker film with a kind of similar plot line. It was a relatively innocent person's descent into depravity, quote unquote. But this film made it seem a lot more... Justine felt like a willing participant, and Joanna in the film I previously mentioned did not as much. So just from the perspective of being a female-identified viewer who is watching other female-identified performers, it was nice to see someone who was, even if they were in sort of a BDSM situation, they seemed very enthusiastic about being there. And that, you know, like, that goes for the whole plot, not just the adult elements. She gets in this situation in a very sad way. It's very upsetting that she felt that she had to end her life prematurely. But she kind of tries to make lemonade out of her situation, and that willingness to go with it made it a lot easier to watch than some other films of the time.
Definitely. Well, I agree with everything you've just said there. I liked the film as well. I liked it a lot, really. You know, I mentioned at the outset that Roger Ebert liked this film and reviewed it favorably. Now Roger Ebert, of course, has passed away, and he has not yet been sent back here to realize his lust-filled potential. But someday when he is, I would love to talk with him about this film because it's character-focused. There is plot, albeit a sparse one. The plot begins and ends well with a decent character arc in between. The apparent homage to No Exit is refreshing. It certainly makes the film more artistic, I think, than it otherwise would have been, and certainly more artistic than almost anything that one sees in this genre, with some exceptions, I would say. The film also, I would point out, makes a statement about pure hedonism, that it can never satisfy you since you habituate to it, leaving you increasingly with a feeling of lack or a thirst you can't quench. So, you know, even though Justine made the best out of her situation, the film also shows that it can be perilous to give in completely to hedonism, because that ultimately cannot satisfy a person. I think the film is right about that.
You could see this as a really good analog for sex addiction, maybe?
Right, exactly.
I really liked it.
The film did a great job, in my opinion. So, Tara, did you find yourself a helping hand?
This was a hard movie to find a helping hand in. There's one obvious choice. I feel like I have to give it to... No. I'm going to pivot mid-helping hand assignment, and I'm going to pick a different one than I was just thinking. My helping hand is the implied cigarette mules bringing the cigarettes to Abaca.
Somebody is helping that man to get his smoke on, but also to gently ease people into the realization that they're dead. Somebody's doing great work out there.
I think those cigarettes may be all that brings joy to Abaca in his position as an afterlife bureaucrat. So maybe that person smuggling, or people, I don't know, smuggling cigarettes to Abaca, they may be the reason that he was amenable to Justine's suggestion that she go back and live her lusty existence. So yeah, heavenly cigarette mules, my helping hand.
All right, well, in keeping with your helping hand, I will forego saying that Abaca was the helping hand, and I will give it to whoever smuggled in that antique cigarette tray for Abaca. If he didn't have that ashtray, what would he do with all these cigarettes? His desk would be entirely ashy, and that beautiful room would be smudged. So I think if you've got the cigarette mule, I've got the ashtray mule. These mules, they're helping out here.
There is so much implied about this world. It's really fun to headcanon who the teacher is, who is sourcing Abaca's cigarettes, what the firm, quote unquote, the afterlife firm that he works at, what's that like? There's so much to think about with this film that is never portrayed in the film, but is kind of implied by the film. And the reason I'm gushing over that so much is because in this genre, you don't always get that.
Yeah, I like to headcanon, I'm trying to headcanon what Albert was in for. What did he actually end up in hell for that would be appropriately punished by the fly thing? And I wonder if he was like a really mean exterminator. Some type of thing where an insect being his only friend is an ultimate ironic punishment. That's my headcanon for Albert. Mean exterminator, sent right to hell.
So we're maybe thinking that he committed wrath on flies out of the 7 deadly sins.
That would be the one, unless he was perhaps envious of the flies. I don't know. I hope he didn't eat them. I'm taking it that he wasn't gluttonous about the flies.
I wonder if maybe he was someone who... My serious answer might be that he was he gaslit someone in reality. Maybe his crime was gaslighting, and so he ends up in this situation where he thinks something is real that is not, and he's got this preoccupation with something that it will never actuate. And on top of that, now he's got someone sharing his cell with him who is going to constantly divert him from trying to solve the whole fly thing. So like that, I was thinking about this while you were talking, and I think, yeah, for me, my serious headcanon is he was a gaslighting asshole, and maybe he deserved to be fixated on a fly.
All right, well, that has been a Feature Bang.
That's been a Feature Bang.
Join us next time for more features and more banging. The best way to support Feature Bang is to like, subscribe to, and share our content across social media platforms.
We'd like to thank Eva Lynn for providing Feature Bang's music. You can find her experimental and electronic tracks on SoundCloud under the name Even, spelled EVYNN3, and alternative hip-hop under Cycle of Hands.